This is Critical Nonsense, our high-lowbrow show about culture, science, and tech. This week, Joey asks me about something called Grabby aliens, and I asked Joey about leftovers.
Woo! I can't think of a song to start off this show. So this is what a Joey sounds like today. Hi, this is what Joey sounds like.
Hi.
And this is what an executive producer and restroom media mogul Jess Vander sounds like.
Hi, this is Jess. I would like to add that there are two key points to Joey's claim just then. Number one, if you haven't listened to our Nonsense VC episode about aptly named deuces, you should definitely have a listen. Joey named it. It was awesome. Wherein I share an idea that had come up with a conversation with a friend about subscription bathroom access. And the second thing is a really incredible podcast concept that I don't know if I'm prepared to share with the universe, Joey, because what if someone takes this grand idea?
You don't need to share it. Just know it's bathroom media related.
Just absurd. Anywho, I don't believe we have housekeeping, do we, Joey?
No, there's no housekeeping other than the plane going over my head. Just everyone you should know, recording podcasts in homes during the summer is hard. You can't close all the windows without turning on an air conditioner. So here we are. You know, you just get that like ambient sound of Brooklyn in your ear holes. No housekeeping. Jess.
Joey.
Welcome to Joey's Alien Podcast.
This is Joey's favorite podcast. That's the segment. Joey's favorite podcast, where Joey has cool things to share with us and the most extreme intellectual nonsense.
Yes. I think
quasi-intellectual nonsense.
No, this is maybe I am quasi-intellectual. I would accept that. But this is like legitimate, like, this is sort of like sitting perfectly in the intelligencer, like 2x2 of like that beautiful, like high-low brow sort of interesting world. The Intelligencer, New York Magazine, highbrow, lowbrow, despicable on one side and brilliant, I believe, on the other.
Wow. Intriguing.
Yeah.
What is it?
So, I recently came across an interview. It was on the Lex Friedman show with a gentleman by the name of now I'm blanking on his name, Robin Hanson. He's economics professor, I believe, at George Mason University. We can confirm that after. He's, I think he's like an extremely lauded economist, but he also sort of has like a particular interest in tackling sort of interesting or weird problems that other people aren't paying attention to. He actually talks a little bit about it in this interview, though it's a 4-hour interview where, if you're tackling something that a lot of other people are paying attention to, if you are the first to get to a solution, it's great, but there are many other people paying attention and someone will get there eventually. So he likes tackling things that people aren't to try to get somewhere interesting first.
Yes, in fact, can confirm Robin Hanson information you have shared is correct. And he also is a research associate at the Future of Humanity Institute of Oxford University, whose reason for being is exactly what you're describing, investigating these sort of big picture questions about humanity.
Yeah. I mean, he's a really fascinating dude and is like very obviously like ultra brilliant, like just able to like sort of fluently speak quickly and like analytically dissect even questions he hasn't thought anything about. It's like, it's interesting just to witness sort of someone who is like a prodigious analyst, But so he has this idea, and there was a paper written, and I'll read you the name of the paper. It's titled, If Loud Aliens Explain Human Earliness, Quiet Aliens Are Also Rare.
Whoa. Many words that I actually recognize, but in combination, completely do not understand.
Exactly. I believe it appeared in the Astrophysical Journal. So the paper sort of centers around this idea of grabby aliens, which we can talk a little bit about.
Grabby,
I do want to get to
like grab?
Yeah, grabby, like taking on resources from an environment and changing the environment around them as a result. So sort of in astronomical, solar system, galactic level scale, it means sort of, making the environment around them look different. Maybe that is like Dyson spheres or things like that, like absorbing much energy from the output of stars. It may mean sort of leaving colonies everywhere as they go. It can take many forms, what that means, but it is sort of like absorbing space as they expand, and changing the environment around them is sort of like maybe like for our level of expertise, like a comfortable lay reduction of what they're talking about. But I found this I found this concept incredibly fascinating. Is maybe it's an understatement, but I find it fascinating for a lot of reasons. So we've talked about before, I have a Drake equation tattoo. I like thinking about these sort of like large scale, like sort of universe, galactic level interactions. Like, do aliens exist? I just enjoy that sort of like postulation. But so much of the historical postulation from physicists and people of that ilk is always around sort of the extreme unlikelihood that aliens exist in the universe based on sort of the lack of evidence to suggest otherwise. Right. And that's what you would expect from a scientist who is sort of data-based and looking for sort of evidence to represent some hypothesis to be able to test or dispute a hypothesis.
Yeah.
This is one of the first things that seems like extremely well thought out, based in sort of probabilities, mathematics, sort of using a lot of the sort of economics-based models. He is an economist, but he's also sort of like very learned in physics and AI and many other fields, politics, and makes a case that the likelihood of aliens in the universe is actually extremely high. And not just that they're high, that the likelihood of grabby aliens in the universe is high. And when might we first encounter grabby aliens? And so the general premise is around this idea that like, why are humans so early? Like, if you run all the math, he's using something called the hard steps model that was sort of, it gets used a lot within cancer research and maybe is a little bit easier to sort of abstract in cancer research. And so the idea is basically like, over the course of your entire lifetime, for cancer to develop, one cell needs to roughly go through like 6 or so hard steps, like 6 distinct mutations potentially that would make that one cell become cancerous and start to proliferate, right? And so the likelihood of one cell to go through those steps is extremely low, but you have billions, if not trillions of cells in your body. And over the course of a lifetime, the likelihood increases over time that those cells will slowly mutate. And, by the time you're 80 the likelihood of developing cancer is significantly higher, right? Like 40% or something like that. And so in this case, they use that hard steps model to say, like, for intelligent life to develop on a planet, if you use the hard steps model, so like first hard step maybe is just for like DNA to sort of form out of like the soup of like, you know, an ocean world or something like that. And then the second concept or the second hard step might be going from like prokaryotic to eukaryotic cells, and then multicellularism.
Okay,
and stuff
got
like
it. So that if is it like if we exist, that's proof that the hard steps have been followed at least once?
Yeah, so the average lifespan of most stars in the universe is like trillions of years. We happen to be on a type of star that has like, you know, a like 5-6 billion year lifespan. Like the sun will burn out in about 1 billion years or turn into a red giant, make life on Earth uninhabitable. We're also sort of, relatively speaking, very early in the history of the universe and how long it will live on. But for us to have developed, most physicists make the assumption that like it is like a very unique, special event that we arrived. But from an economist perspective, it's saying like, you can't assume that you are the exception to the rule. In fact, like, you should assume probabilistically that you're sort of somewhere in the middle of the bell curve, which based on that math says that like the likelihood that other societies already exist in this time is really high, in particular because they're saying grabbiness is sort of an inherent nature of societies, that they will start to expand. And at some point there's a threshold that if you don't develop before that threshold, then you'll never be able to develop, because the grabby aliens will take up the volume of space that you may have like into other intelligent species or life forms would have filled had the grabby aliens not like changed those environments and taken over. Are you tracking so far?
Maybe. I think what I'm getting is aliens potentially, if you look at things from a different lens, are maybe quite likely to exist if you are thinking about the way things tend to grow, and also just the sheer length of time that could maybe be what we're working with here. I guess I'm wondering, where's the lowbrow part of all of this?
The lowbrow part of this is like aliens, you know, like the last thing I'll say in this, which I think is interesting, and then I'll pose the question, which will allow us to go on a tangent.
We're still in the setup. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you asked me to do some of the explaining.
This is great.
This is great. Everyone loves it. Everyone loves aliens.
Joey just like teaching us all the articles.
The last thing I'll say is based on if you take those assumptions, the reason why you aren't seeing evidence of other aliens, they have like basically like 3 metrics within their equations, and one of them is speed. And so the reason why you might not be seeing aliens is because they're expanding extremely fast. Like this idea of grabby aliens is they start to expand out. And if you make assumptions that like those societies are expanding out at a third of the speed of light, then essentially you won't see them until they're pretty close to where you are in the universe. Like you'll still have, you know, relative to our lifespans, plenty of time to prepare, but like relative to the universal scale, like they're almost to where you are. And so, you know, I found this all fascinating from the perspective of one, he talks about, Robin Hanson has this idea of like view quakes, like things that once you learn, sort of like shake and rumble your like worldview and your perspective. And for me, hearing a scientist like talk about these ideas in sort of like the perspective that it would be likely was a bit of this for me, right? Like someone who is using like a scientific approach, a mathematical approach to demonstrate like the likelihood of this was like that for me. And so what I wanted to ask you, Jessica Vander, was, do you prefer living in the idea, even just from our mental states, do you prefer living in a universe where humanity is sort of one snowflake civilization, life exists here on a mote of dust in the outer reaches of the Milky Way? Or do you prefer living in a universe that is loud and noisy and populated?
Well, let's just think about this question as though I have no control over these things, but either way, it's sort of how I choose to go about
Yes.
about things. I think that could be this question of what type of universe would you prefer to live in feels like something that also could be what the scientific community has concluded, which is like, well, even if they're out there and we haven't seen any evidence that they're there yet, like what is that even? It's not yet relevant in our bubble to even have to think about what that would mean. And so what, like, even if you are imagining a quote unquote loud universe where there are plenty of beings out there that are different from us or maybe even similar, it's almost just like how if we don't even know how we affect each other, if we've never even interacted with one another, like how can you live in a universe where you're trying to insert some kind of way when it doesn't exist, versus like on Earth we have a theoretical social contract because we at least have some knowledge that other beings exist, and so therefore like there are certain things that you do and ways we go about the world, hopeful, I mean sometimes contrary to the fact that there are other beings here on this planet with us, like that's an interesting thing. The one thing that made me think a little bit though is if we all did go about our lives imagining or embracing the idea that there are other beings out there, could that do something to like rally the troops in a way? Like, could we all get really more unified? Like, we're all on Team Earth. People love teams. Like, if there is an idea that there are other teams out there, this is a very human way of thinking. It's like Team Earth, like, let's go. Let's pull our things together because now we have a common enemy, question mark. that just seems like such a human way to think about it, but how interesting.
I mean, like viewing it as an enemy, I think does make it interesting, but it is sort of this like, there's sort of like an epistemological question of within science where simply like entertaining ideas that are unknown or currently unprovable, I think sort of like the religion of science, even though science may not be sort of like truly, like check all the categories of religion, in many ways feels like a religion. There's like a doctrine of beliefs, protocols on behavior, right? There's sort of questions of ethics that get introduced within science and things of that nature. I feel like
this is spicy given like the evidence distinction.
Yeah, and so the idea of like, can you entertain ideas that are contrary without becoming sort of a social pariah makes it such that like even entertaining weird ideas just for the purpose of it. Like the recent sort of questions of like, is LaMDA this sort of language model that Google developed on a massive neural network? Like, is it sentient? Has like been in the news. And I don't know whether it's sentient. I'm not close enough to the model and how it's developed and so on and so forth. But the issue that I had with it, and I think is similar to this, is like, people determining that it's not before experiencing it, or not sort of like opening their perspective that like sentience might emerge in different ways than exactly like humanity, and there may be like degrees of sentience, was something that sort of bothered me when you saw like the engineering community talking about it, and they're like, this is just a language model that has been fed the entire internet worth of text based on a neural network with over 1 trillion commands and like 1 billion nodes, like whatever. I'm like, that sounds like a lot of things that could potentially make a different form of sentience possible. I'm not saying it's there, but in this same way, right, like you're talking about, like, what is the viewquake equivalent for society if we just sort of changed our perspective and made the assumption that like other things do exist, that we aren't special? Does it change the way that you interact in your own solar system, in your own community? Does it change your perspective on like the types of questions that you ask in science, even just by like having that sort of fundamental shift in openness to possibility? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's what you're talking about reminds me of that, like the pale blue dot perspective thing. The astronaut who like went up into space and was like, whoa, feeling so small, come back down to Earth, and I feel like I really want to protect this very vulnerable floating orb that I and everyone that I know exists lives on. I don't know. I think you maybe just expect too much of humanity. I don't know if that's really pessimistic, but like I said, I think it is in our nature to want to create confirmation of the things that we see and know, and the idea that all of us could suddenly become scientists and be like, well, we haven't proven it's not true, so maybe it's true, and like, well, now what do we do? It's not it's more that I just perhaps pessimistically think it's unrealistic, but I appreciate the thought exercise of like, if there were some kind of very sudden and visible evidence, and have that be some kind of perspective shift for the entire world, turning us into Team Earth, could be kind of interesting. But I mean, like, this is why I think immediately about climate change, like too slow and gradual of even something that should be perspective changing. We are so human that it doesn't even matter what is rational and logical.
Right. I mean, I think there's the perspective, right, where you're saying like some evidence to change your mind, right? There has been this like increase recently in the release of like military information about like UFO sightings and things like that. Again, I don't know.
Aliens.
I don't know that they're real or not, but there's like this like increasing body coming from the military where they're like, we don't know what this is.
Yeah.
Sure looks a whole lot like a ship. We can't disprove it based on any like, whatever, a like weather balloon or ball lightning or things like that, like all like the telltale things when you didn't have like the like tons of sensors or visual evidence where you would sort of explain something away. Like they started a new commission to be like, can we find any way to disprove prove this under like known phenomena? And so far nothing.
maybe also you're just shedding a light on what has been a pattern throughout history of like, rarely at a societal level are we so open-minded. However, there tend to be a tiny group of visionary / crazy people who are like, no, I definitely think there's something here. And either it goes really well and they happen to be right and have like invented something, like discovered.
The sun does not revolve around
it's like,
the earth.
Oh, shoot. That's crazy. Where it's the heliocentric universe. That's the wildest thing, Copernicus. But like, otherwise you're a witch, you're a pariah, or like we don't embrace those people, even though eventually when evidence potentially becomes overwhelming, there's got to be some kind of push. But I think that's the thing too. Even you bring up the Google AI story that has been circulating recently, and like, the baseline is like, I happen to trust the people closest to it, that like if they're probably being like, nah, this is like literally no one else is saying this except this one person. I'm like, I understand. I get it. And what are the upsides of having the one crazy person who's like, maybe, like, I also expect that most of the time those people maybe are wrong, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't encourage the wild, crazy visionaries just in case, maybe there's something that we don't know. And then we should figure out what happens next.
Yeah, I mean, I think like that idea of sort of trying to, we've talked about it in the past, but like when you look at sort of the like 5-factor personality models, right? Like openness is like one of those 5 factors, right? It's like extroversion, neuroticism, openness, conscientiousness, and another factor like I'm blanking on right now. But that openness, right, I think it may sit at sort of an inherent level for individuals, and sort of when you aggregate that societally may even sort of shrink a little bit further. And so that expectation of just being like, what if this is real? Like for me, like I score high on openness in that like personality typing. I'm like, like what would it be like? Like I enjoy, like I'm entertained by that experience of just like being like, well, I probably don't think that's true, but like if it were true, what would it mean? Like, and so expecting that sort of societally, I think is challenging. But I do think in the same way, I think we've spoken about this before, like my parents didn't tell me Santa wasn't real until I was like 11.
Santa's
I knew.
Real. Still real. Just
I knew, but I was just
level
like
setting for the group.
It's more fun to live in a universe where Santa's real, and if no parental figure or like adult figure is gonna say otherwise, then like I'm just gonna like carry on until someone like forces me to pop that bubble.
Mm-hmm.
And so like, by that age, kids in school are like, Santa's not real and whatever. And I'm like, I'm happy. Like I come downstairs, there's presents. I'm not like going searching for presents. Like I wanted to have that moment. Like same with like Easter Bunny. I'm like, great. I wake up, I go find like eggs. This is way better. Like the Waldorf school like type of idea where it's like, just teach kids to like pretend like wood elves are real and things like that is just like a more fun mental universe to construct. And so in the same way, like if given the choice, I'm like, yeah, like I have no evidence that aliens don't exist, and I like prefer living in a universe where like other life exists in other places, and there's like diversity and like unknown sort of like challenges and trying to like meet and interact and whatever. Like likelihood of that happening in my lifetime is like vanishingly small, but it is still like a fun idea to entertain. And so like encountering this model is like, no, it's a lot. And even then when you present things like the recent like military releases of like the Tic Tac video or things like that. In this model, it's like, good news is if those aliens are here, they're probably not grabby. It probably means that like they have not achieved that level of growth, so we're not in immediate danger. It means like they are born out of like our same stellar nursery or something like that. Anyways.
Huh. Well,
so do you I don't think you actually answered the question ever.
Because I feel like the question is flawed. Do I prefer living in one universe or another? I don't get to decide what universe I prefer to live in, but
it's a Schrodinger question. It like we don't know one way or the other, so you get to pick, right? Like you can decide for yourself that like you're going to conduct your life as if Earth is like life is vanishingly rare and only exists on Earth, or that it is abundant in like the universe because the universe itself is so vast. Probabilistically, it's likely that it exists somewhere else. And so you get to pick because you have no evidence one way or the other to like refute or confirm.
Yeah, I feel like for social reasons, it makes sense that both groups exist. There is enough people to be like, if this is all we have, we better take care of it and also treat each other nice, because we may not have a second shot and the aliens may not be friendly, even if there are any aliens. And then the second side is like very optimistic. This is why we got space pioneers and people trying to figure out like a backup plan of even our limited existence and protecting on that long-term big picture scale. I don't know, Joey. I can't force a decision. I don't know if aliens are real, but either way, I understand why having a decent split of alien believers and non-alien believers may on net be our best shot at surviving.
It's such like a non-committal, like waffly answer.
Look, I indulged this whole period of Joey's favorite podcast. Can you at least, just for once, acknowledge that sometimes a closed-ended question is really difficult? Thank you, listeners. If you tell me that I'm wrong and you have a strong opinion either way, please send us a note, or at least send Joey a note, because he will find that really lovely.
If you would like to learn more, we'll put it in the show notes, but there is a website just called grabbyaliens.com. There's you can read the paper if you so choose. There's like a sim and some other videos that people made sort of explaining some of the concepts, or you can listen to Robin Hanson talk about it in the Lex Friedman podcast. We'll share that as well. It's, if for nothing else, it's like mind expanding just to hear someone really smart talk about a thing you're not used to hearing someone really smart talk about. Open
your mind. Even if it sounds crazy and you can think to yourself, that's crazy, that's okay. Because, I guess what else are we doing? Thanks.
You want to hear how he described fantasy, like the genre?
Okay.
He said that fantasy is just a way of telling ourselves stories of things we wish we were true, that we don't have to be constrained by rules.
We wish orcs were around? Probably not.
Nope, but we wish we were powerful and the one true ring existed and magic, or, the way of telling a love story without having to be constrained to like, well, that wouldn't happen in Columbus, Ohio.
Yeah, that's like, duh. Say
idiots.
something interesting, Robin Hanson. Tell me something that isn't obvious. Gosh. Idiot. This should take 2 seconds. Yesterday, I had a really unfortunate dinner because I was trying to clean out the fridge. I was having leftovers. And that doesn't always happen. Oftentimes, I'm excited to have leftovers, to eat something I enjoyed. again, even if not in its sublime quality from its original state, maybe enjoy it anew, cold, directly out of the refrigerator. And I'm not even exaggerating, but I will say sometimes leftovers exist because it wasn't that great the first time, but you happened to make a lot of it by accident. And this is the case. I was left with leftovers. I didn't want to be wasteful. And I'm just curious how you handle leftovers, especially ones that are icky.
I am not a leftover lover. There are categories of foods where I think like they reheat well, but I try to avoid I try to just like portion the initial creation of the food such that like there won't be leftovers.
Making just enough to eat for whenever you're setting it up to be eaten.
Which was a training period, certainly, when you have like a child introduced that starts eating your food and you're like, how much food do they actually need? You know, like things like that.
A lot, but also less.
Yeah. But like pastas, I think like reheat well. So like if we make some kind of pasta dish, I always like that. You know, pizza, classic, reheats well. But I'm not.
You don't eat it cold?
I do not eat it cold. Absolutely.
Absolutely not.
I think it is despicable.
Wow. Okay.
So I don't eat leftovers a lot I think because of that, like I know that there are actually some foods that are like sometimes improve in leftovers. But I don't know whether it's just like I'm having a thing that is between, 20 and 50% less good than it was yesterday. Is tough for me. And I'll just like wind up like I'd rather have like a bowl of cereal or something like that than or wind up not eating, which happens for me.
Yeah. I mean, I think I recognize that a lot of my leftover consumption is not as much driven by how tasty the thing is and often driven by waste aversion. So especially from eating out at a restaurant and not wanting to throw away the things that I couldn't finish with inevitably large portion sizes, I'll usually bring that home. And then also, I just like for convenience sake, sometimes it makes a lot of sense to make things in batches or have a little extra or something. And it's just a bummer if it doesn't go exactly as planned. That said, I think, sometimes there's room for creativity. You make like a little dry salmon by accident, turn it into a salmon salad, add some mayo or well, if you like mayo, if you don't like mayo, well then you just don't.
You're
I don't know what to do. Like one time I turned a burrito stump, which is like the end part of the burrito you didn't finish, and I made it into sort of like a egg scramble-y chilaquiles adjacent breakfast meal, and like that was pretty good. But the thing is, sometimes it just, I don't know, like how much work should you put incrementally into a food that has already been made once? And, once you take it out from the restaurant that you ate it in, there's only a little bit left. Is it more wasteful to be bringing it back in yet another takeout container? There's just so many questions. It's not as simple as just finish your food,
First of all, burrito stump, great word. Like,
truly.
Love it.
It needs to marinate too. The stump must marinate in the fridge.
It's so descriptive, and the word itself is so unappealing. You want to eat my burrito stump?
To be clear, I didn't invent this. The sort of from I've discovered this from the West Coasters who are much more familiar with the burrito lifestyle. Yeah.
We went through a period where I think it comes down to like the preparation moment for thinking ahead to leftovers and like versatility, right? Like I know some people will batch cook certain types of things in anticipation of being able to like reduce food preparation and ease of eating, like through a week, bring, pack lunches, things like that. Like we've gone through periods where we did that, where we would make like chilies or like pork shoulder. Like if you like cook a full pork shoulder, you wind up with like 4 pounds of pork, but then that as a leftover, right? Like that evening, maybe you make sandwiches or maybe you make a pasta or something, but then once you put it in, it becomes an ingredient,
right?
As opposed to,
it's not even a leftover really anymore. It becomes anew.
Yeah, so it's like we can do it in eggs. We can just quickly make sandwiches. We can put it in a pasta. We can put it over rice. You can put it in a soup or whatever it is, like sort of like Asian noodles. Like it gives you that versatility to use it in the future, and like that part I like. And so I have that same like waste aversion like button. So sometimes it means like I'll just eat a little bit more than I was anticipating. If we like over eyeballed the amount we created, I'll just be like, all right, I'll eat it now. It's not going to be good tomorrow.
Yeah.
Or occasionally I'll just be like, all right, I'll eat this thing, even though I don't want to eat leftovers, but I'm trying to avoid having leftovers. So then I don't have to like be confronted
then you don't
with
have to deal with this.
My wasteful behaviors.
Well,
or
this
anything.
is the thing, right? Like in some ways you think, oh, a leftover is already a final finished product. So why would I add incremental effort, labor, whatever else into something that should already be done? But part of that is because maybe it could have a new life that is worth something, whereas in its present state, it isn't worth anything. And sometimes you need to change more things about it to make it worth eating. I don't know.
They're like, do you think some cultures or people are inherently more prone to leftovers, or like there's a textural change that inevitably happens in sort of the leftover process? Like I like General Tso's chicken as just like a simple example, but like I think it does not restore in any capacity where I want to eat it. But like someone we know, Johnny, like loves leftover General Tso's, and I'm like, that is like
so specific,
so disgusting to me. Like just on an individual, I don't think he's disgusting. I just like that, like the congealing of the sauce. But some people are like, congealed sauce, I love it, and I'm like,
I think culturally there's a lot more about turning leftovers into ingredients, or what I would not even call leftovering, but just like the whole quote unquote meal prepping or batch cooking, that type of thing. I think is a totally separate universe. It is an interesting question if we're purely looking at, who gets excited about leftovers in an unmodified form. And I think there's definitely got to be like something about the way you were raised. Like, did you grow up eating cold General Tso's and that's why it gets you so excited? I
grew up eating almost no cold foods.
See, like there you go.
Everything was like prepared hot. We didn't have any like like cold noodle dishes as like an equivalent, right? Like like soba dishes in Japan or whatever. And so I like that sort of temperature range is interesting for me. But when I started dating my wife, they would often eat like room temperature food. Like sometimes like before the meal or whatever, like if they'd had, spare ribs or like roast chicken or something, it would just be out on the counter in a dish and people could like nibble or sort of graze on those things. And so like there was a wider variance in like temperatures and textures and things that I didn't have. And so my wife loves like leftovers and will eat almost any leftovers we have, and I'm much more like, oh, do we have to?
No, really?
Like even to the point where like I would not prepare it. Like sometimes I'm just like not going to eat something and she'll go prepare something for herself and then just bring me something. And I'm like, oh shit. Well, now you made it. I have to eat it. Like,
thank you.
All right, I'll
appreciate
it's like,
this.
thank you. And
for the record, I like leftovers usually. I'm a leftovers fan. But I recognize that it is not, and maybe that is something that was instilled in me about like there are leftovers to get excited about. But yeah, I understand that this is not something that everyone shares. And regardless, I do think there's like a cost benefit analysis of how someone should handle leftovers to make sure that you're ultimately not being wasteful.
Yeah.
That means you're not going to eat it. Like, don't bring it home. Even if you feel guilty about leaving something. But also, if it will be eaten, then you definitely should. I don't know. It's a whole thing.
Yeah. Here we are. Is that the wrap-up corner?
That's it. Yeah.
That's it. Don't be wasteful. If you don't like leftovers, don't make as much food. If you do, man,
do it.
Lucky. Yeah, you're lucky.
And give me your leftover conversion ingredient tips. That was a weird way of saying that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but there's like, to your point of the conversion, right? Like Alex, the like croqueta is like what was called like peasant food or poor food, right? It's like just grind up all the shit you had left, roll it into a ball and deep fry it, which is like incredible.
That's resourcefulness. Like I believe in turning leftovers into lemonade. I know that there are hurdles to making that happen.
Dumplings is the same thing, right? Like the reason you have it's like you eat a chicken, it's like scrape off all the extra stuff.
French onion soup, like literally half of the foods we eat are those things. So like all hell leftover, and maybe this is a better way to land it, right? Like yes, there are many things that can convert leftovers, and maybe we just need to think about the possibilities of what to do instead of allowing ourselves to be stagnant with where the leftovers sit in their original form.
Invent new croquetas and dumplings. That's the rule.
Make
a burrito stump dumpling. Although stump dumplings is fun to say. Critical Nonsense is a Sylvain production.
Brought to you by Leftovers Incorporated, where we take whatever you have that you don't want in your fridge and convert it into interesting new meals. Only $5.99 for a weekly subscription. That sounds like a terrible price point. We need to talk to them.
As always, we'd like to thank our executive producer and stump dump, Jess Vander.
Yikes. We'd like to thank sound engineer and I can't say
croqueta.
All of the words associated with the alien conversation are terrible. Grabby, loud. These are all. How about just like our gentle and quiet sound engineer, Alex Contel? Sorry, if you're nothing like these aliens, you are so much more.
We'd like to thank our programming coordinator and musical alien, Les Jacobs.
And the ever entertaining and certainly sentient production help. Thank you to Sarah Gilbert and Nora Mestrich.
Certainly Sentient, the name of your album. As always, thank you, Ellen.
Sorry.
Special thanks, Robin Hanson. Thanks for being smart and doing weird shit.
Thanks for inspiring Joey, for sure.
Yeah.
I'd also like to thank my mom for teaching me many ways to be resourceful in the kitchen.
Yeah. Let's thank our moms all the time. I'd like to thank my mom.
We should thank moms every show.
I just like to thank her. Thanks, Mom.
Thanks, Mom.
All right. Well, love you. Bye.
Okay. Bye. There's a Mimi Chang's dumpling that's like a burrito dumpling. This is like a thing. They like made a fusion dumpling flavor. All right, whatever. Gotta go. Yes.